Everyone thought Roy Orbison's heart just gave up for 30 years. However, disclosed medical records present a different picture. Months before he passed away, his doctors were aware that something was off. Traces of chemicals that shouldn't have been there were discovered. Music was not the focus of his most recent recording session. He was gathering proof of what actually transpired with his family. His 2 sons were killed in a fire that wasn't an accident. Someone wanted Roy silenced because he had proof. You won't believe what he found out about that terrible night. Who killed the Orbison family is revealed by the recording he left behind. On April 23, 1936, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Roy Kelton Orbison was born in Vernon, Texas, at a time when families were struggling daily to exist, and the Dust Bowl was scraping the soil mercilessly. His parents, Orby Lee and Nyan Schultz Orbison, were often on the road due to their jobs, and lived in a modest home. Roy's early recollections were infused with the sound of engines and country music, while Orby worked as a garage mechanic and oil well driller. Dust storms and long silent evenings characterized Vernon's harshness, but he felt a spark ignited inside that little dwelling. Roy requested a harmonica when he was 6 years old. Instead, after dark, his father gave him a guitar and taught him some basic chords. That guitar remained with him, and influenced the course he would take for the remainder of his life when the day eventually slowed down. Roy's appetite for music increased as he developed. He began studying the tunes. Orby performed at family get-togethers at the age of 6. By the age of 8, Roy was performing Hank Williams songs, like Lovesick Blues, while standing in front of a microphone at Vernon's KVWC radio station. His meager income, typically barely enough for school supplies, meant the world to a family still struggling with the effects of the Great Depression. Neighbors who listened to the radio broadcast began talking about the youngster with the powerful voice, because there was something older in his voice than his years. He started writing songs gradually as well, putting his emotions on paper before releasing them to the public. Then something even more significant occurred. He was given a weekly position on KVWC at the age of 8. He gained his own show every Saturday after winning a radio contest when he was 9 years old. He composed his debut song, A Vow of Love, while sitting outside his grandmother's home at that time. He participated in a talent competition linked to a touring medical exhibition in 1946. He tied for first place while singing Joel Blonde and Mountain Dew. $15 was the prize. Roy offered his friend who had brought his guitar half of his $7.50. Even before his name became well known, that little deed revealed who he was. Life changed once more immediately after that. The family relocated to Wink, Texas, in 1946. Orby was drawn there by work in the oil fields, and the town did not resemble Vernon at all. Wink was lonely, little, and dry. Later on, Roy claimed it was sand, oil, grease, football, and oil fields. Nothing warm, nothing tender. The lonesome sound that would later reverberate through his lyrics was fashioned by the silent emptiness surrounding Wink, and the scenery seeped into him. He started his first band, the Wink Westerners, at the age of 13. The boys eventually performed at local honky-tonks after practicing swing and country music. In neighboring Kermit, Texas, they even earned a weekly show on Curve. Money began to come in gradually. Roy won $400 at one dance, which was a substantial sum for a youngster in the 1940s, and every performance strengthened his conviction that music might be the solution. But then he experienced an unforgettable anguish from life. Roy's mother, Nyan, passed away unexpectedly from a respiratory disease in 1953, when Roy was just 17 years old. He was devastated by the loss. Wink was feeling lonely already, and now he had lost the anchor. In order to support his father, Roy took on odd occupations, such as pumping gas till late at night. He was driven inward by grief. He put all of his emotions into the song. Every inquiry, every bit of loneliness, every hurt. Later, such feelings were expressed in his ballads, which caused everyone to pause and pay attention. Thinking he might need a fallback option, he enrolled in North Texas State College in Denton in 1954 to study geology. Geology, however, did not hold him. Music did. After a year, he changed to English and history. He kept the Wink Westerners alive while in college by playing with Dick Penner, W.D.E. Moore, and Billy Pat Ellis. They performed at fraternity gatherings and wrote tunes. They recorded Ooby Dooby in Dallas in 1955 at Jim Beck's studio. Influenced by Sun Records' new rockabilly sound, Roy became aware of the reality when the song became a local smash. Music was no longer a pipe fantasy. It was a path to success. After just one semester, he transferred to Odessa Junior College from North Texas State. He founded the Teen Kings there, and they quickly won a talent competition that led to a TV appearance on Kyamid in Midland. He was driven toward Memphis by that momentum. After Papa Holofield, the owner of a record store, played Ooby Dooby to Sam Phillips on the phone, the Teen Kings went to Sun Records for an audition in April 1956. After hearing what they had to say, Phillips asked them to Sun. A few months after they re-recorded the song on March 19, 1956, it rose to number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100. About 200,000 copies were sold. Roy experienced his first taste of national success. However, there were fissures behind the growth. By October, it was number 1 in the UK, after peaking at number 2 in the US. It was the longest song he ever released to remain on the UK charts for 24 weeks. In the US alone, almost 1 million copies were sold. This calm man with a loud voice suddenly appeared everywhere. Additionally, the sound he created in the studio raised the standard for pop music. Before they ever knew his name, people could feel that voice. And he started entering rooms he had previously only dreamed of nearly overnight. Only the Lonely developed into something greater than a hit, while the earth continued to whirl. By the end of 1961, Roy's name had spread to nations that hardly knew American rock, and it had sold another 1 million copies in the US. Every breath has emotion, crescendos, and dramatic strings. Everything about it felt different from what was heard on the radio. Artists paid close attention. He was heard by the Beatles. Those builds were examined by the Beach Boys. Because it sounded like Heartbreak Rising, fans clung to that falsetto. The song began Roy Orbison's rise to prominence in both rock and pop, and it remained on the UK charts for almost 6 months. Someone who, without lifting his hand, could shake the room. He exuded the same type of subdued strength, and that was an accident. He didn't wear his prescription spectacles to a show in 1963. He then put on his normal pair of dark sunglasses for the outdoors. The audience saw something enigmatic rather than uneasy, and he felt less exposed, almost concealed inside the frame. He wore them. They quickly became a part of him. The brightness of those lenses made it possible for people to see him from across a stadium, and the spectacles became just as famous as the voice that reverberated above every stage. While others, like Elvis, bounced their hips and moved to the music, he remained still on stage because of the same thing. Roy barely moved as he entered the spotlight. Fans watched Blue Angel stand still, wearing all black, and letting his voice do the talking when he debuted in 1961 and rose to number 9. It wasn't a ruse. It wasn't a posture. It was faith and sound alone. His performances turned into times when the audience leaned in, and everything slowed down. Long after the lights had gone out, some could still recall the sensation, and his signature became that silence. But life was crumbling under the stage lights. As his traveling schedule expanded, his marriage to Claudette Freddie suffered first. He was barely at home when he recorded his first number 1 single, Running Scared, in 1961. The gap widened. He was traveling throughout Britain by 1963, and Claudette began an affair with the contractor constructing their Hendersonville, Tennessee, home because she was lonely and exhausted. Roy was deeply shocked to learn the truth. The two parted ways in November 1964. Then, in an attempt to patch up something shaky, they got married again in August 1965, following the birth of their third child. Their marriage's tale demonstrated how celebrity could both subtly tear a man's life apart and elevate him to new heights. Despite all of this chaos, the music continued to rise. Released in July 1961, Crying became a phenomenon in and of itself. On October 7, 1961, it peaked at number 1 on the US Cashbox chart, climbed to number 2 on Billboard, peaked at number 25 in the UK, and topped the Australian charts for 3 weeks in a row that November. More than 8 million copies were sold. For years, the Spanish guitar solo remained in people's memories, and it even influenced the flamenco rock sound that emerged 10 years later. In 2002, the song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Additionally, it was ranked number 69 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 best songs ever in 2010. It was a huge success. It was an opening to the world. Then came the tour that further cemented his legacy. The Beatles, a fledgling band, were Roy's opening act on a UK tour in May 1963. Nobody anticipated their impending global takeover. The tour began in Slough on May 18 and concluded in Blackburn on June 9. 17 dates spread around Scotland, Wales, and England. Roy was the main act at initially, but the Beatles became co-headliners due to their rapid growth. Roy frequently stole the show even then. When he performed in Dreams at London's Gemont Cinema, the audience roared so loudly that backstage staff questioned how anyone could follow him. He was dubbed the world's best singer by John Lennon. According to Ringo Starr, it was awful to follow Roy, since he would always wow the crowd. It's over-elevated him even farther in 1964. It topped the chart for 2 weeks, and remained there for a total of 18 weeks, peaking at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 in the UK. After bickering with Claudette, Roy taped it in a single take, and the unadulterated intensity rocked the audience. His voice soared, the strings rose, and everything was caught by producer Fred Foster and engineer Bill Porter. It was a pulsating lover's lament, according to Cashbox. Billboard appreciated each line's emotion. It turned out to be one of his most popular songs. Then Oh, Pretty Woman appeared. He and Bill D wrote it in roughly 40 minutes at Roy's house on July 24, 1964. Claudette said that she was leaving. Roy immediately sang the introductory sentence, when Dee commented that a beautiful woman never needs money. On August Honest, Roy and 4 other guitarists recorded the song at Nashville's RCA Studio B. It sold over 7 million copies, became his second number 1 single, and peaked at number 1 in both the US and the UK in September 1964. Because the bass riff sounded too sexual at initially, some radio stations even declined to play it. Despite all of that, it went on to become one of the decade's most popular songs. But its notoriety also brought with it certain negative aspects. Roy acknowledged having groupie encounters while traveling in 1964. Already feeling isolated, Claudette's jealousy intensified until it drove her to commit adultery. In November 1964, while Oh, Pretty Woman was at its height, Roy filed for divorce after learning about the affair. The divorce was final by early 1965. Nevertheless, within 10 months, they were back together, attempting to mend the damage caused by fear, distance, and celebrity. Tragic events ensued after a brief period of quiet. Roy and Claudette were riding motorbikes close to Gallatin, Tennessee, on June 6, 1966. A pickup truck emerged. After being flung, Claudette passed away in Roy's arms an hour later. She was just 24. Roy was hushed by the shock, but he survived with only minor injuries. For months he canceled shows. After burying her in Hendersonville, he attempted to breathe in a suddenly empty world. His song Too Soon to Know, which carried his sadness, peaked at number 3 in the UK. 2 months later, Roy had recorded Crawling Back in October 1965, even before she passed away. The label encouraged him to write brighter songs that didn't reflect his feelings. When it peaked at number 46, he frequently broke down during the sessions, and the urge to appear positive conflicted with the sadness he was feeling inside. Even if the public didn't completely hear it at the time, the song turned into a silent admission of what he held. Then came a loss that was nearly impossible to describe. Roy's Hendersonville home was destroyed by fire on September 14, 1968, when he was traveling through England. Anthony, age 6, and Roy Duane, age 10, passed away while they were asleep. 3-year-old Wesley was the only one to survive after being dragged out by his grandparents. In less than an hour, the house was completely destroyed by the fire. Investigators thought that outdated wiring caused an aerosol can to explode. When Roy heard the news from across the ocean, his heart broke once more. He struggled to write and speak for a long time, and he was barely able to bear the burden. He sold the property to Johnny Cash following the fire. Telling Roy that only wonderful things would now grow there, Cash planted an orchard across the ashes. Although it was a little deed, it grew to represent hope. Later, Roy stated that he wished to recall the love rather than the suffering that existed there. After numerous ownership changes, Barry Gibb constructed a new house on the property in 2008. Nevertheless, the memory persisted, etched in Roy's heart and the earth. His body suffered from the grief. He started chain smoking, occasionally 2 packs every day. He had suffered from ulcers since 1960, and they got worse. The stress was eating away at him from the inside, the doctors cautioned. But he continued to perform. When life continued attempting to knock him down, music became the only thing that kept him upright, and the only road he could follow. Roy Orbison made a decision that seemed significant as he entered 1965. He left Monument Records, the company that had helped him achieve success with records like Oh Pretty Woman, and leaped toward MGM after they gave him $1 million and discussed film options. Although it sounded like a fresh start, the price was high. In addition to a constant flow of singles, he had to record 3 complete albums annually. And he wrote almost 70 songs in his first year alone, as a result of the strain. While the Beatles and the rest of the British invasion saturated every radio station, his debut MGM song, Rideway, barely made it to number 100 on the Billboard chart. In Canada and the UK, his first MGM record peaked at number 1, but hardly anyone in America took note. Only 3 of his songs had made it to the US Top 40 at the end of his MGM career. His inventiveness persisted despite the fact that he had written or co-authored 42 of the first 70 songs he released. But the timing continued to fail him. Then came 1967. Roy managed to squeeze 20 gigs into his 14-day trip of Australia. In Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, and Mount Gambier, he performed on stages. He even gave 2 performances at Sydney Stadium in a single day, on January 21. However, he was deeply saddened by the loss of his wife, Claude, in June 1966. His voice was sapped by grief and jet lag. He sounded exhausted and hoarse, according to reviewers. Every show took something away from him that he was unable to replace, yet he still went on stage and tried to give the audience what they had come for. He released Walk On in 1968, a year later. Although it was hidden beneath layers of strings he never wanted, many listeners believed it to be one of his most emotive compositions. The clarity of his voice was obscured by the glossy, overproduced sound that MGM had imposed. Australia's number 53, the UK's number 39, Canada's number 93, and America's number 121 were all achieved by the single. It came to represent what he was struggling with, and served as a reminder of how frequently his opinions were disregarded, while others chose the style of his music. But life continued on. Roy married Barbara Jacobs in Nashville on March 25, 1969. She was 19. Shortly before losing 2 of his sons in a house fire, in September 1968, he had met her. Paparazzi were drawn to the wedding because they were more interested in making noise than in comprehending the significance of the occasion. It was referred to as a rebound. They handled it like a show. However, Roy clung to her because she restored a tiny bit of brightness in his life. Later, they had 2 sons, Roy Kelton Jr. and Alexander, and he did everything in his power to protect that new family, as the outside world continued to try to infiltrate his personal sorrow. The loneliness increased when he traveled to Nashville later that year for fresh MGM sessions. Bob Dylan was even aware of it. Roy hardly talked, as if the weight of everything had driven him inward. According to Dylan, who visited Roy once, Roy recorded with studio musicians rather than intimate friends, and the atmosphere was frequently chilly. He had been forced into a quiet corner, where music no longer seemed like the home it once did due to years of pressure, loss, and label control. Then 1970 arrived. In the hopes that the trend might change, Roy published God Love You under MGM. Penny Arcade, a song on the album, soared to the top of the UK charts. The fact that it was his 3rd number 1 there demonstrated that Britain was still paying attention. However, just 50,000 copies of the record were sold in America. His song seemed out of place as disco took over radio stations and retail establishments. Years later, however, some copies of the CD sold for hundreds of dollars, making it a prize for collectors. However, it was another indication at the time that his relationship with American audiences was waning. He was put to the ultimate test in the ensuing years. Roy had to take a 6-month hiatus from performing after injuring his throat during a strenuous British tour in 1972. He was annoyed by the silence, but he took use of it to compose in the middle of the night for the Golden Globe-nominated movie of the same name. The wound still frightened him. Despite the indications, his death on December 6, 1988, felt unexpected. After a day of laughing and flying remote-control airplanes with his sons, he passed out in his bathroom at the age of 52. Physicians were unable to bring him back to life. Severe obstructions that had been accumulating for years were discovered during the autopsy. After that, Mystery Girl came out and won him an enormous Grammy. After his passing, he became the only musician since Elvis Presley to simultaneously have 2 albums in the top 5. In 2018, Barbara, his wife, developed a holographic performance using over 200,000 hand-touched frames and safeguarded his catalog. Later, in 2019, his sons started the Roy Orbison Legacy Tour, which used a virtual avatar to bring him back to the stage. Fans across the US, UK, and Europe witnessed Roy sing once more, in a level that was unthinkable just a few decades ago. His closing comments provide the story's penultimate twist. He discussed the Mystery Girl World Tour with Barbara. He was thrilled. He felt prepared. Months prior, doctors had cautioned him that if he didn't alter his way of living, he would be seriously at risk. However, he persisted. Days before he passed away, he was full of life, full of plans, and full of simple, cozy family moments.